Okay, and we're back. Welcome to season 2 of the NDA podcast. We're so excited to get stuck in, chatting about some really big topics, having some pretty heated debates. I'll be joined by the biggest and best creatives that the industry's got, and honestly, they're all absolute legends. So can't wait for you to hear everything that's coming up. We've got a few revelations as well through the season. We're unpacking issues that were highly requested by you, our lovely listeners. Thank you so much for all your love and support since season 1. We heard you. Hopefully we're delivering everything that you have been filling up our inbox with. Make sure you tune in every Wednesday. Hit subscribe. That way you're going to get a notification as soon as we're live. There are a few changes this season. Every episode will have just 2 guests, and they're going to have different perspectives or opinions or different lived experience. The thing they have in common is they tend to be quite passionate about the topic, and they've got lots to share. And then to help us get a wider understanding of the issue of that week, we'll be hearing stories from our listeners. Some of these are anonymous, and I think that's going to help make sure we really get under the skin and honestly hear the cold, hard truth of what's going on out there. And let's just say our listeners don't hold back, and we're here for it. We do need to start somewhere. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about clients. The good ones, the bad ones, the ones we shout about, and perhaps the ones that we might hide away in the bottom drawer of our desk. We're asking questions like, is it really as simple as saying we don't work with oil companies? If we look hard enough, could we actually find fault with all of our clients? How feasible is it to have morals and run a business in the current financial climate? And ultimately, how much responsibility does the creative industry have? And of course, off with a bang, today's guests are absolutely brilliant. I'll let them introduce themselves. Joe, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I am Johanna Roca, creative venture partner at Accept and Proceed. And I am definitely very passionate about this subject because I do firmly believe that who we give creative energy to matters. It really does. So, yeah.
Great. Pedro?
Yes, my name is Pedro Messias. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a creative director and partner at brand design agency OMSE, based here in London. And this topic is a really important one to us because the origin of the name OMSE is actually a Swedish word meaning like-minded. So the decision of who we work with and who we don't is actually quite an existential and important part of how we run the studio. So it's a decision that we take very seriously, and we're very passionate about. So I'm excited to be discussing the topic with you and to hear your points of view on the subject as well.
So qualified, I did tell you. I will be here as well. I'm Katie Cadwell, co-founder of Lucky Dip. My pronouns are she, her. I will be your host, and I will be the voice of you, our listeners, today and every Wednesday. Let's get into it. So we're going to start with a question that we asked on Instagram. What is a bad client? What would you just define as a bad client? Who is a bad client to you? And we got some really interesting answers. So Pedro and Joe, I'm going to put you immediately on the spot, and we're going to do a real quick fire gut reaction. Would you work for insert business or industry? And you just have to say
at the same time.
Yeah, do it at the same time. That would be good. And just give me a yes or a no. And we're going to quick fire through it, and then we'll talk about some of those afterwards. Okay, ready?
Yes.
Would you work for Shell?
No.
No.
Medical marijuana?
Yes.
Yes.
Gambling?
No.
No.
Pharmaceuticals?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Alcohol?
Yes.
Maybe.
Dunkin' Donuts?
No.
Maybe for us, maybe.
Lost Mary vapes, so vapes or e-cigarettes for anyone who's not in the UK.
No.
No.
A religious organisation?
Yes, it's one of our favorite clients, but it's one that
Yeah,
I would love to
maybe.
unpack later.
Maybe.
And lastly, a political party?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. On the last one, I'm really surprised by that. Um, some kind of resounding yeses and nos there, which is expected, and then some that were a little more difficult to decide. So before I reveal what our listeners said yes and no to, maybe if I can ask both of you, which one on that list is kind of most contentious or maybe hardest to decide on? Pedro, you mentioned the religious organization, for example.
Yeah, I think it's a difficult one to answer in a straightforward way, and to be honest, I was thinking maybe for most of those categories, some of them were easier, gambling, vapes, no, but for the most part, what we tried to do is to have a slightly more nuanced look at the specific client that we're speaking to rather than the sector. Um, because I think, as you were mentioning in your intro, within kind of like this neoliberal capitalist construct that we operate in, I think every business is unfortunately subject to being corrupted by the needs of that market. And so it's not as simple as we'll work with client A or client B. I think what we always try to do is understand the mindset and the intentions behind what that client is doing and what we're helping them do with our work. Um, so at the very least, we will always entertain a conversation with everybody who reaches out to get a sense of, is their passion in the right place? Are they legitimately trying to do something that just challenges the status quo and tries to improve things, even just by a little bit? And if we feel like their intentions are in that right place, then we're happy to do that. So Hackney Church was a great example of that, where caught us by surprise. We started working with them before I joined, but they're still a great partner of ours. Is one that caught us by surprise. We're not a religious group in the studio, and it's not the focus of our work. But again, they had a really interesting mission to really help the community in East London through what they were doing. And a big part of that brief was not to do something that only catered to regular churchgoers, but to invite people like us who are not necessarily part of an organized religion to kind of take part and join the community in a creative and engaging way. And just by having those conversations, we just really believed in the vision of what they were doing, and it's honestly a great place. Like I'm personally, I'm as atheist as they come, but I just love going to that place. It's a great gig venue. There's a great brewery. It's legitimately a good spot, and I think they do some brilliant work. So it's one I think where we have to be open-minded and to help people who may come from a different point of view do something that has a positive impact.
Yeah, that's super interesting. Joe, how about you? I think that Big Pharma was a maybe from you, and I think Dunkin' Donuts was a clear no. So I'd love to know why. What you've got against the donuts?
I love donuts. What do I have against? I guess it would have to be the right arm of Dunkin' Donuts. Very much like Pedro. I hate to be the type of person that just determines the outcome before even hearing the brief. And I think the challenge matters, the people matter. Most of the corporations have foundations, have sustainability, have a philanthropic arm. So like there are many other aspects of a corporation that could be potentially very interesting. My no reaction was simply, I suspect, just living in LA and coming from America and just being very close to corporate America. I'd probably say that my reaction was probably a gut reaction. But now more tempered, I would definitely have a conversation and then make a call.
Yeah, awesome. The other one that really surprised me, so spoiler alert maybe of what our listeners voted, was the big yes to political organisation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, really? So do you mean
Yeah.
that you would only work, are you thinking about that from a point of view as, oh, I would work with them if they aligned with my values and morals, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Okay,
that's
interesting.
absolutely. I feel like branding in politics is so important. Like the brand, the messaging of candidates. I know someone who just got the Biden-Harris campaign for this re-election, and I'm like, that's a huge gig and a very important one to make in elections that are currently happening. So I feel like it's pretty up there in the things that I would, yeah, I'd definitely like to work on.
Yeah.
Completely. And even just to add to that, I don't know the actual percentage or the stats, but studies have been made to show that people tend to work to trust, I'm sorry, brands a lot more than political organizations, which puts so much power in the hands of big corporations. And it's not that it's inherently wrong. If they use it well, then great. But I do think that if we actually want to make a bigger difference, I think politics has to be part of it because there has to be some sort of like body in charge of regulating the whole landscape. So I
Mm-hmm.
think we have used our power to give that trust to private companies. Why not use the power of creativity to bring back that level of trust in a political organization? Of course, it's a messy spectrum, but everything is, and I think we shouldn't shy away from it.
Absolutely. I feel like on top of that, Pedro, um, design has typically been apolitical. Like it has
Mm.
shied away from being political. And in a way, I find that problematic because it seems that we either sit above politics and then ignore the responsibility that we have with what's happening in the world. And
Yeah.
it's taken me a long time to accept that I couldn't put the two together. I couldn't design and ignore what's happening when I turned on the news. So I'm like,
Mm.
no, I'm designing more, I'm more present in what I see and how I affect it. And I think politics is just one of them.
Yeah, totally. Really interesting. I have no doubt we're going to unpick a little bit more of that as we get in, but just to let you know what our listeners thought. So, 90% or more of people said that they wouldn't work with Shell, a gambling
Ooh.
company, or vape.
Mhm.
So, super aligned. 80% said no to a religious organization. And that's really interesting, Pedro. I think the fact that you yourself aren't religious, but you did work for Hackney Church. On the flip side, more than 80% of people said that they would work for medical marijuana, an alcohol brand, and Dunkin' Donuts. And then the ones that split people were pharma companies. Still, 68% of people said yes. And then a political party was much more evenly spread, quite like our political landscape. 45% saying yes and 55% saying no.
Mm-hmm.
So super interesting, not, really not dissimilar to your feeling. And then the other type of clients that people said they wouldn't work for that were a bit more specific. Someone reached out and said that they had been approached by an ethical fur company. So I think people that are trying to reimagine quite a historically negative industry or business. Newspapers, we heard quite a lot. A little bit of bashing against the sun. Any like drones that could be used in war. So the product might not necessarily be seen as something that's related to war, but it could be used in that way. And meat. Quite a few people said meat. So if we're taking this definition of a bad client quite literally, what can I ask you both? What's the worst client that you've ever worked for? A client that now you might look back and go, I don't know if Joe or Pedro of today would accept that brief if it came across my desk.
I don't mind going first because it's actually one
Go.
that you actually brought up earlier. But I did work with an energy company in my previous job. I was working at a bigger branding agency, and I'm not going to name names, but it was an interesting one because also like it's 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 a complicated, contentious market. In fairness, I was working at Wolf Olins at the time, and they were quite good at asking the team who felt comfortable working in that project and who didn't. So it wasn't like a situation where we were kind of demanded to work on it. But I was curious enough to understand it better, and I think that's where things start to get a little bit muddy and a little bit complicated, where I think the energy companies that exist and what's also frustrating about them is that they do have the power and the technology and the means to help us make the urgent transition that we need to make towards renewables. But sadly, because of how their performance is measured, they're not incentivized at all to do that, right? They can make so much more money by continuing to invest in fossil fuel because they just have faster results.
Mm.
Um, and then that one, honestly, it didn't leave a good taste in my mouth, also because it was creatively, it was quite bland. It wasn't even an exciting opportunity. And then to kind
Yeah.
of like see that um, the intentions which initially were posed as quite genuine and trying to do things in a better way were not quite as honest as we would have liked to believe. But I think, I had the experience of at least giving them the benefit of the doubt in learning from that experience. But I think that was one where yeah, it was easy to say no to Shell now because, okay, I've done something similar and I wouldn't do
Mhm.
that again.
Yeah. Okay, great. Good answer. Thank you.
I have a very bad record in my life. Now that you asked that question, I was like, oh God. Um, I worked for pesticides. I didn't have an option. The company didn't really ask if we wanted to work for them. And I also worked for gambling, a casino, and similar. It's almost like you're very young to even know that you have an option to opt out. Um, I it was never a question, and it was never really something that I thought I could. I'm thinking like in terms of I'm Colombian and I depend on a visa sponsorship, and I will say whatever whomever's sponsoring me, I'm like I'm not going to say no to this. So that puts me in a pickle, but also the privilege of and the ignorance of just youth.
Yeah.
Um, and I feel like I worked. I don't even know. I don't even remember them. I just know I was present. I don't even remember the output. And yeah, that's definitely on my books.
Thanks for being honest, because I think a lot of people have that kind of similar backlog of work that perhaps with an older eye or a more experienced eye or a more privileged lens wouldn't accept. I want to talk about clients that aren't bad on the surface. So maybe their business or their offer or their product isn't necessarily bad for us, but they have negativity. So a good example of this would be Every, and the rebrand that they went through was Super Union. I can't even remember their old names. So they've done a good job of that. But basically, the notion that they covered up terrible service and a lot of negative reviews with a shiny new rebrand and a new name. And just what you think about the industry helping businesses kind of cover up its errors or using design as a distraction almost.
Like I really hate to speak on behalf of other people because you never really know what the brief is. You never really know the challenge of a company. And as you said before in your introduction, running a company is not easy. And you have salaries to pay and you have responsibilities to your employees, etc. So I definitely don't want to be that. I also want to acknowledge that I've said privilege before, but we need to be aware that we come from tremendous privilege on being able to pick our clients with the current companies that we're working for. And many people don't have that luxury. And so, so I guess it's, with brands that are like this, that are controversial, that you see them unfold, this drama unfold on LinkedIn with people calling out and God forbid canceling companies. It's just not, I don't like adding to that because you just weren't there, right? And
Yeah.
behind those people, like I have many, many, many friends that work in the fossil fuel industry. And are they bad people? No, they're amongst my best of friends, but they have no other choice, or that's the career that they picked, 20 years ago. And that's so I don't know. I feel like maybe this is a cop out, but I feel that I'm absolutely not placed to judge anyone for the decisions that they make. I know personally what I would not do.
Yeah.
And I know what Accept and Proceed wouldn't do, and how we collectively discuss these types of clients. But yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I couldn't agree more. I think the last thing that I would want to do is to throw a peer under the bus for having made a
Hmm.
mistake. And sometimes, like I was saying even earlier from my previous experience, I believed in a company's vision or what they were
Mm.
mentioning they wanted to achieve on the brief, and through experience, I figured out that it wasn't quite the right thing. And I honestly believe that people can make sometimes those decisions that were not done with bad intentions, and they actually felt optimistic about kind of making a difference, and the client didn't help. I think it's unfortunate that companies will do that, like larger businesses will do that, kind of try to use the veneer of branding and marketing and creativity to hide some of their intentions or the problems behind it. But I think that's just also the game of branding in a way, is the industry that we operate in.
Mm.
We are in a position not only to make a business look good, but to actually transform it. But of course, we need the client to be on board, and I think it's we need to be selective and try to do the best that we can to make the right decisions. But sometimes it might not be always on point. And I think as a creative industry, I think the best thing that we can do, instead of just kind of writing angry tweets or articles, is to support each other really, and to kind of like
Hmm.
start conversations like this one where we can find consensus and accept, okay, what are the guardrails of like what are the boundaries within which we should operate, and try to
Mm.
learn from each other and support each other, rather than just kind of go like, shame on you for working with this company or that one. Because to Joe's point, we don't know what those conversations were like, and what was involved. So yeah, I would never kind of like speak about it without fully understanding what happened.
I think that that's a really good, you both brought up really good points actually, and that's something I want to talk about is when you set off on a brief with one intention or one goal, and something changes during that process between you accepting the job and the work going out into the world. So I'm going to use P&O Cruises as an example. Quite a nice brand, no, not particularly controversial. And then they got into quite a lot of trouble, and let 800 people go, right? And faced huge backlash. And all of a sudden, they became this villainous client overnight. And if you were working with them or had historically worked with them, all of a sudden, that project is incredibly contentious. So what would be the approach there? How would you mitigate something like that, finding out halfway through a project that actually this client might not be that good?
I feel that you have in the moments of like the creative process, you have assessment periods of how it's going, because it could be that the client's intentions aren't necessarily the ones at the beginning, as Pedro
Mm.
and you just mentioned, but it could also be that something happens, in their industry, or something, any economic crisis, like something happens that is beyond their control, that they have to make also hard decisions. It can also be something as simple as the rapport between client and agency is just not good. It's just not
Mm.
there. So for many number of reasons, we have to be able to assess this relationship. And I know we're in the service industry, but we cannot be servants to clients. The best clients are partners, and you have to be able to say, it's not me, it's you, but it's me, and it's over. And that breakup is hard as a business, especially if build a team around it. But I think it's very necessary. And a business that is able to stop something before it just goes to shit. I'm sorry for my French, but before it just goes wrong, I feel like, yeah, that's what there should be, those processes in place, to be able to determine a client, not only at the beginning when you're accepting the client in or in the pipeline, but throughout the process.
That's quite difficult, is it? Like, let's use OMSE as an example. You're not a massive studio, Pedro. So say you've accepted a big job, and everything's signed and everything's well underway, and you've paid external suppliers or whatever that looks like for the business, and then the client gets cancelled. So it's quite difficult to kind of. I think you're right, Joe, that the opportunity is there, but it's a difficult one to step out from that situation.
No, it really is. I think fortunately, knock on wood, we haven't been through that kind of situation. We have been in a situation where we did decide that the relationship wasn't right. And a bit like what Joe is saying, I think it comes down to having that honest relationship from the beginning. And if we can kind of honestly assess what the relationship looks like and what are we working towards as a unit, then it just comes down to at some point us admitting like, you know what, we're not the right people to help you go through this. But again, in speaking in hypothetical terms, it's hard to say what I would do or not do in that situation. I think the first thing that we would do if something like that happened would be to actually have an honest, private conversation to understand what really were the circumstances that led to this. Um, could this have been prevented or dealt with in a better way? And even if they were, like, are your intentions still in a good place? Because I also believe that we shouldn't just cancel everyone forever for one kind of bad episode. I still believe that companies can learn from mistakes and do things better. And as somebody running a business, I know that I'm not immune to that potentially happening within my business and me having to make one of those decisions and making those mistakes. So I think having that little bit of empathy and kindness is quite important. But then, of course, if we know that we can't justify or help somebody navigate that situation, then it's probably better that we're honest and accept that we won't be the people who will help them get over the line.
Yeah. Great answers. Thank you. I know I'm being probing. I'm just asking some of the
I
things that
love
people
it.
have sent in. I want to talk a little bit about that process of how we decide who we're going to work with. We've already covered that it's not black and white at all. So I'm going to read out a message that we had from Mirella Arapian, who's founder and creative director of Mech Studio. And she said, who we don't work with is just as important as who we do work with. First and foremost, we only partner with purpose-led clients who share our vision and are doing work for the greater good. We preference projects that adhere to at least one of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have an internal screening policy in place for new partners to ensure we're a good fit and that they align with our ethos and values, as well as our very intuitive gut instinct, and our team gets a say. How do you both decide? What does that screening process look like? Is it a rigid thing? Is it a questionnaire? Is it a tick box? Is it something that's a little bit more fluid and instinctual?
Yeah, for us, we think it's at least so far it's been very difficult to standardize that process. The first thing that always happens for us, we just try to get to start a conversation as quickly as possible. Let's move away from email as quickly as possible, uh, especially now that it's easy to like meet face to face again. We always try to meet face to face if we can, and the client is based in London. But just being able to like see someone, look at them in the eyes, have an honest conversation, ask these probing questions like what you're asking. I think you start to get a feel for who you're dealing with even at a personal individual level. You're not looking just as at business needs, but like who is the person that I'm going to be working with and what's where does their passion and vision lie? And I think from that we get a sense of how earnest they are about what they're trying to do. Again, it's not like a perfect, flawless process, but we think it's the best way. I think tick boxing for us not quite practical. We're not very mathematical people at the studio, and also you see there are plenty of examples of how that can fall short, even with like like even with the B Corp accreditation kind of coming under question and being reviewed. So uh, it's I think just looking at the nuance of every brief is works better for us.
Yeah, I would say we use the framework of B Corp as a backbone of assessment. So it's not necessarily a mathematical process, but it gives us an idea of what types of clients we'd like to work for. After that, it's a ruthless investigation between people that care about the new business pipeline. It's like as soon as something's in there, everyone goes out and does their own research. They can point if there's an orange flag or a red flag. We can discuss it openly. It's quite rigorous. I'm not very surprised. I'm very happy that it is, but it's also a space for conversation, a space for debate, because what one person might think is a red flag, it isn't for the rest. And after all, it's a business that we're running. So it it's not a black and white decision, far from it. And the brief matters, less so the client. The person that you're talking to matters, and the brief matters significantly.
Really good answers. We had an example of what that kind of filtration system looks like on inbound, because that's essentially what we're doing, is filtering out the people that, I mean, there's a lot of criteria. Budget is one of the other criteria that we often use to judge new work. But Emily Penny, who sent in this, we only work with service-based businesses. We don't need more stuff in the world, so let's stop marketing things that will end up in landfill. Now, I feel personally a little conflicted about this statement. So my question to you both, which is a little existential for halfway through the episode, to what extent is it the creative industry's job to decide what consumers can and can't have? Like, that's essentially, we're saying to them, you can't buy these things. It feels a little, I don't know, I guess I'm asking, is it our job to decide to that extent what we should be, the options that we should be giving consumers?
I think it's a responsibility. I do think it's a responsibility. I don't think there should be a rule, and you know, I won't I won't be kind of like pointing fingers at anyone for creating something or not. But you know, we do love products even from an aesthetic point of view, but isn't also from um a utility point of view. I'm speaking to you through through a computer, which is an object, which is sitting on a desk, which is an object, and you know, so objects are very much necessary, and I don't think there's anything wrong with making them beautiful if we need to, and I really appreciate the artistry that goes into it. So obviously, if somebody prefers not to work with physical products, fine. Services also have their impact, because if they're running through a cloud, that also has a carbon footprint. So I think it's important to be honest about that. Uh, but I couldn't agree more that I think you know, we do have the responsibility to make our own judgment as to whether or not we believe that that object or product is adding something to the world that we believe should exist in the world. Um, but again, I think it's not as simple as that. So last year we did a project for London Design Festival called Time is Running Out, which was like actually questioning that. We very often make things that will end up in a landfill, and we're adding to the problem as makers, as designers. So it was an investigation that we did in partnership with a company called Plastic Free, where we were trying to make 24 clocks out of like plastic free materials so that those clocks will deteriorate over time. And it was a bit of an education for us in terms of like, how can you make an object that is a little bit more mindful, that won't leave a footprint. And it was interesting to see the barriers there. And we did have to use plastic in the end to make the clocks, because for the body of the clock it was quite easy, but then for the mechanism that would control the hands, you either have very, very nice, expensive Swiss clock mechanisms, which we tried very hard to get, but were denied. Or you have cheap plastic mechanisms, and there's nothing in between, and it was a shock. So it was a great eye-opening experience to understand like how hard it is to actually make things in a better way.
Yeah.
But I think that's why we shouldn't shy away from making things, but we should all together figure out how can we make this possible? How can we make making better decisions easier for everyone, so we can kind of like be less conflicted about doing these things.
I love this. I also feel like our industry isn't that old. It is, I think design grew really from the Industrial Revolution, and as that, design itself came from the mass production of things to many, right? And whether that's industrial design and graphic design and all of these, it really came from that. So I I feel that getting out of consumerism altogether is hard, because design is intrinsically linked with consumption and capital gains and capitalism and so on and so forth. So having the ability to critically think what we spend our time in, or who we help, is important. It is
Yeah.
important. And we talked about that it's not black and white, and we've talked about privilege and all these things, but ignoring that, and back to your point, Katie, it doesn't stop with us. It's designers are not going to solve everything, but because but we shouldn't use that as an excuse to not do anything. We shouldn't use apathy. We should definitely, yes, stand up and be responsible and keep an eye out on what we invest in.
Amazing. Really, really good answers. I'm going to zoom us right back in now. So we're going to be on the studio floor, and this is going to be more for the creatives listening that aren't running a business. They have been asked to work on a project that conflicts with their morals. And what does saying no to a client look like? So I've got a voice note from Johnny from Hey What Studio that I'm going to play for you both.
Hi there. A couple of years ago, I got approached to animate some bits for a very well-known gambling app, but I turned it down. I think the gambling industry is inherently quite exploitative, and I don't think people are as informed about the risks as much as they are about something like alcohol or vaping or cigarettes or something like that. The money was good, but I didn't really want to play a part in pushing anything to do with it, especially as I don't think I would have been proud to show that work, or it might put off a potential employer in the future. The ads would have been promoting Cheltenham races as well, which I think also brings animal welfare into the conversation. I was just wondering if anyone on the panel has faced a similar dilemma, how they responded to that situation, and if there had been more money, would there have been more temptation?
I'm actually going to rephrase my question a little bit, having heard that. So I think we're looking at it from a point of view of running a business and accepting projects. What does saying no to a client look like? So in the realities of business, and with the realities of having a full studio of mouths to feed, how easy is it to say no? Is there enough money that can convince you otherwise? And yeah, just a little bit about your experiences on that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I can start by saying selecting a client is as important as selecting a team member. It's very thorough, the process of, because as we all discussed, letting go of a client is horrible, and it has like a lot of implications as the same way as letting go of someone in the business. So you take good care at doing that. However, things get tough at times, and I think we had at my previous company For the People, we had a session where we had said no to a few clients that would have brought significant amount of money in, and we're looking at potentially having to let go of a few people in the business because we just couldn't. So we said no, and we had the implications where we just couldn't keep up the number of people. And what we did was sat down at everyone and explained what the situation was. And the alternative was that we would all go down to 4 days a week and cut our pay by a fifth, in order to keep everyone. And that is also, it could look like a collective effort, but it's a very hard effort for those people that are, wanting to get a house and wanting that kind of constant. It is a hard decision for everyone to make. And everyone quietly voted, and we decided to go with that option. So it has real implications. I think as part of your culture and your team, if you have those conversations honestly, openly, and that that, I think looking back, had we taken one of those clients, we would have potentially missed out on a few clients that came after that were very much aligned with our values. So it is a hard decision, and it's not black and white, as we can clearly tell in the 40 minutes that we've been talking. But yeah, I think communicating all of this is perhaps the best way, or it has worked, at least for me.
Yeah, no, that sounds like the perfect way of dealing with that kind of decision, really, because it's similar for us. For us, we've never been in a position that we had to make such a difficult decision, but we have a very small but very highly opinionated team that we all sit very close to. So um, if I can't walk into that room and be able to look at everyone in the eye and explain why we're working with this client or that client, then I know I'm in trouble. And I can't afford with such a small team also to lose great talent because of these decisions. So I think unless we are all on board and everybody's point of view has been taken on, then we can't make decisions like this. And it ultimately somehow it's hard, but it's also not so hard because and I think even the voice note is perfect for this, and I think it's a courageous decision, but a very smart one because the work that you put out ends up being the work that you get known for. And more often than not, you will be approached to do work that reflects things that you've done in the past. So maybe I'm saying no to a big contract right now, but I'm also saying no to then having to work with more clients like that in the future. So it's better not to indulge that if you really can avoid it. And if you can't, as long as you're being honest with the team and with yourself, then you can find a smart way to just kind of do it for the right reasons. But then try to move on from it as quickly as possible. But no, I think we we really wouldn't take it on unless we really needed and the whole team was on board.
Yeah. I'm glad you've both mentioned the team being part of this conversation a lot. So I want to read out a story that was sent in anonymously. And this listener was able to voice her concerns to a CD over working with a client in the oil industry. And they've said, I'm very thankful that I have a good relationship with my creative director and he's created an environment where we feel safe voicing our opinions and concerns. I've worked in places where this wasn't the case and it can be quite isolating. I was pretty honest about my feelings. I told him that it felt dirty to do some of the work and he was a little surprised and upset to hear that, but I think he understood. Next time we had a project that came in for them, he asked me if I was okay to work on it before assigning me to the job, which was really considerate of him in my opinion. So I'm not going to ask you if you think the team should get a say because I know that you both do. But I am going to say that it is very difficult to be a junior or to be a midway and be in a position where you can push back against some of these briefs. And I bet there are a lot of people listening who agree with all the things that we've said, but in practice that's actually really hard.
Yeah, I think the culture of the company matters and matters a lot. As that person mentioned, the ability of them being able to speak up is huge. I hope that where I work, there's that ability to be able to voice concerns. For sure. I don't know if I could work in any other place because I myself voice concerns all the time and I like to be challenged on my biases against some briefs, and I really hope that is, yeah, it, and sometimes also people will find flags where you didn't, or they will, you said at the beginning, we all have different shared experiences. So people might come at it from different angles that you hadn't even thought about. So it's actually an advantage to have your team being part of that input of intake of clients.
No, 100%. And I think, yeah, I really feel for people who find themselves in that position where they feel like they can't voice their opinions or they might be putting their job or their livelihood at risk. I have to admit, I've been fortunate to work in places where the culture was good and you could have those open dialogues, even if it was deciding whether or not to work on a project. But I think is a similar one. It's a hard advice to give, and I wouldn't give it lightly, but similar to us when we decide to work with a specific client or not, sometimes you also need to question like whether or not you want to continue working with a certain agency or not for a long time. But of course, it's not as straightforward. Looking for a job, especially in the current market, is not easy. But potentially, like looking for options might be a better way to do it because it's not a great position to be in. And I think most creative people will just need that little bit of support and encouragement to know that they can voice their opinions safely and apply their creativity to the right things.
Yeah.
You know what? I mentor currently two women in Latin America, and they do not have that our experiences, Pedro. Like they work in
Yeah.
companies where they cannot say, or they can say it, but no one's going to pay attention to them. And no matter how much I have tried to coach her in doing so, it's just the culture is so strong.
Yeah.
There's a culture of fear and a culture of silence. And we might have had incredible jobs. And I wonder how much of that is really the percentage of jobs out there, and how many people are, don't have our experiences.
Well, honestly, it's so slim. Also coming from
Exactly.
South America, it's probably no surprise that we're both coming from the same continent, but find ourselves working in London, right? But it's and have spent time working in the US. The percentage is so small. I think we probably need to do a little bit of another episode about decolonizing the creative industry because it's still so divided where you have that freedom to do work in a more open playing field. That's very true.
Exactly. And then you encourage them to give extra time to focus on things, to focus their creativity on different outlets and outlets that align with their values. But at the end of the day, of an entire day, they're knackered. So it's people, they're like, why am I giving overtime to, and then this relationship with design just, yeah, it's not the same at all as our
Yeah.
experience here. So I want to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
No, I think that's really important, and I think that leads me really nicely into my next point, which is somebody is doing this work. Somebody is doing all the work for all these businesses that we can sit back and from our LinkedIn pedestals say that we shouldn't work for companies like this. So Michael Johnson, who we're going to hear from again later on in the season, calls it the Robin Hood principle, where agencies justify their work for bad people by doing a couple of charity or not-for-profit projects to balance things out, and perhaps they are only promoting the good projects that they're working on, and actually the projects that are keeping the studio lights on are for these slightly bigger, more corporate businesses. So I was interested, and I asked our Instagram followers how much bottom drawer work that they had. So the work that would never see the light of day. 38% of people are happy to talk about all the work that they've ever done. So no shame there. 62% of people have some work that they don't want to talk about. So the majority of us have got work that maybe we wish we hadn't done, or we're a little bit ashamed of the clients, or maybe wouldn't have chosen to work on them ourselves. And 4% of people keep most of their work a secret. How much bottom drawer work do you think you both have over the course of your career? How many projects, what percentage of projects do you kind of think, oh, that doesn't really align to who I am right now?
As I said, I worked on gambling in the past, and I never really put it in my portfolio because that's not the type of work that resonates with me. Because I don't think I have anything in my portfolio from that time because I was a shitty designer. So it's better not to show that type of stuff anyway. But yeah, maybe on the last decade, I'd probably say there's no hiding. If there is hiding, it's simply because we haven't had the time to do the case study. So the hiding is in the fact that we're late on that, but not in that there's some dodgy hide. I think it matters why you're hiding it, right? And yeah, and again, this is very personal to why people are hiding certain things, but I'm an open book. And the internet doesn't forgive either. It's like if you put something out there, like this podcast, it will stay there forever.
Okay, I hear you both. So I'm going to give you a really specific example, and see how you feel about it. And I guess, well, let me give you a little bit of context first. So Havas won the Shell account and faced an enormous amount of backlash. There were, for people that don't know how that kind of went down, there were climate protests in the London office for a very, very, very long time. B-corp, because Havas have B-corp status, they've been called to investigate their agency status since agreeing to work with Shell. Now, I'm actually going to play, and this is a first for NDA, I'm going to play a TikTok from Rob Mayhew, who creates these kind of satire videos all about agency life. But scarily, this isn't actually that satire because he's using the exact wording from Yannick Bolleré's interview with Campaign and the kind of statement that they put out after Havas won the Shell job.
Hi Campaign, it's Yannick. Look, at Havas, we have a clear mission to make a meaningful difference for brands, businesses and people. And the question is actually not really about Shell. It's more about an industry like fossil fuels, or all industries really that are considered controversial. It could be car manufacturers, it could be airline companies, a bit of pharmaceuticals. What's that? Pet food. Oh, pet food? Yeah, they could be perceived as controversial. Love that. What we decided is to help brands engage in a meaningful transition journey. So as long as brands are engaged in trying to become more meaningful, to make a meaningful difference in the world, we believe we will make more effective impact from within. We believe the most effective change comes from within. So we decided to respond to the Shell pitch, but at the same time to be true to ourselves, to let them know that at Havas, we are on a meaningful journey ourselves, and we have to say we won't participate in any greenwashing whatsoever, and we will accompany them and help them achieve their transition.
I'm looking at the visuals. You guys are just hearing the audio. What do you think? What do you think about that specific example?
I mean, I think the soundtrack to that voice note is incredible. Really, really not doing him any favors there, right? I think I have cynical inclinations, but again, I think I don't want to necessarily kind of lay into anybody in the industry as well, because there is some truth in what he's saying in terms of like it is that more nuanced thing. Every type of client can pose problems. Someone that can look problematic on the surface might actually be someone who's interested in doing something different. I do think it's a misjudgment in this particular case. But then again, I don't know the full realities of what running that business is. And I do know that unfortunately, they're operating in a system that is not conducive to potentially making more constructive or better decisions. If you're running a big ad agency that is owned by a massive media conglomerate that is demanding higher and higher profit margins from you every year and increasingly higher targets, then you're under a certain amount of pressure. And then that's not great. So then I think rather than pointing fingers at specific businesses or industries, I think we need to question the system that in which we operate in a lot more to help us kind of get out of this really. But yeah, no, again, I don't want to spend too much time criticizing another company. I know that I wouldn't take on that job at mine, but that's also why I chose to run my own rather than work for someone else.
Yeah.
I love that. I remember seeing this entire Havas debacle unfold on LinkedIn, and I was surprised by how many people were just simply outraged, and there was anger and visceral, emotions being shared on LinkedIn, but also the backlash that B-corp had of like, why are you giving this? And this skit was hilarious because of the amount of times he used the word meaningful. And I think, Pedro, you mentioned it at the beginning, the world that we live in today needs companies like Shell to change. They need to. And they either Shell kills us or we kill Shell. It's like this is just something has to give. However, and I think it's important for companies to work with Shell to help them on that transition. I just don't believe that those companies are us. I don't think that a company that sits under the marketing realm is able to deliver the deep change that a company like this requires. And that probably is a cynic in me, that says as long as you're reporting to a CMO, it is still part of marketing, which is to market something, right?
Yeah.
And if you are, the brief would come from, I don't know, the impact arm or the CEO's need to the shareholders because the actions are going to plummet. I don't know. Like there must be something deeper, and I just don't know if we are the best equipped to handle such a change. And I say royal we. So that's why I'm cynical with these types of things. It's like it just reeks of greenwashing through and through.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've talked a lot about how it is incredibly nuanced, and there's no real way to define or set parameters on these kind of decisions. But B Corp has tried to do that. Achieving B Corp status is really hard. It's costly to get there in the first place and incredibly costly to maintain. And a lot of the industry is increasingly facing pressure to go through that process. So when this all came out, and Joe, you mentioned Accept and Proceed has B Corp, I think they were probably one of the first actually. Did you feel a bit like, oh shit, if Havas has B Corp and they can take on Shell, all of a sudden our B Corp status and that emblem, we don't feel quite so proud of that anymore? Is it becoming a little bit more meaningless?
I don't know. I feel B Corp has never been, it's not a badge of honor. It's almost as I said before, a framework for us to be better. And it is very hard. And I think B Corp should be commended for their efforts in trying to dictate some sort of guide. And we abide by those rules because it has indeed made the business better. And we are proud of being a B Corp, but it will attract B Corps. I don't see it as necessarily something, I don't know. I feel like it is still a guide for us. And as long as it's used that way, I don't think we're that precious with it, is what I'm trying to say. I most certainly, when all of this was happening, I think I was in conversations with accepting the job or not. It most certainly didn't impact my decision because by then I knew truly what Accept and Proceed's values were. I had met with the people, so I don't think that a reflection on B Corp's reputation would have affected my decision on joining the company or not. But I feel like almost all of the what are they called? These certifications or accreditations that get given, whether that's Fair Trade or Rainforest or the Frog or all of these have had controversies. And I think they should have controversies. Otherwise, they're not doing their job. They should question, like, this Shell has made B Corp question whether the relationship with Havas, but also themselves as an institution, what do we abide by? And I think those are important, healthy conversations to have.
Yeah, absolutely.
No, completely. And even just to add to that, I think, because it's a business as well, a B Corp, right? So obviously it's going to have some flaws and there's going to be financial implications to it. But I love this point of view of being a framework, right? I think even within marketing and branding and advertising, we're very quick to use like these shorthands as if like, okay, we've got this, we've ticked this box, now it's done. I think it's looking at it as more of like a process of like all of us learning how to do things better gradually and improving things gradually is the best way to look at it. The job is not done just because you became a B Corp, because to your point, Joe, B Corp is also always in the process of evaluating, is this the better way of measuring things? So it's I think we have to accept that it's there's no end game really. It's a constant process of like unlearning and learning how to do things better.
For the same thing is that there is no ultimate score. So B Corp is not 1 out of 100. And if you're 100, you're perfect. No, it's an endless score. And the higher you get that score, the better you are on your own personal goal, right? And that's also important. I think Accept and Proceed got accredited again recently. And we're not comparing scores with anyone. We're comparing scores with ourselves. And seeing that change from a few years ago to now it means that we are doing things well for our people and for our clients. I feel like in that way, B Corp is, a fantastic tool.
Yeah. Amazing. I've just got a couple more questions for you both. So I think that what we've talked about is that the industry is slowly shifting and having more awareness, right, around our responsibility. And this kind of evolution is also something that happens personally. So something that you might have felt very strongly about suddenly being in a business and seeing how a business works and an agency runs, you might feel less strongly about it, or there might be something that as over time you've got more education about it, you're thinking, I wouldn't be willing to work on that. I'm going to really make it old school and read a little excerpt from First Things First. And for anyone who wasn't around, which I think is all of us, it was published in 1964. And there's this line in it that says, We think there are other things more worth using our skill and experience on. There are signs for streets and buildings, books and periodicals, catalogues, instructional manuals, industrial photography, educational aids, films, television features, scientific and industrial publications, and all the other media through which we promote our trade, our education, our culture, and our greater awareness of the world. And I think that when we all start out, we perhaps have a quite romantic view on how our work can kind of change the world, and the people we work with is a huge part of that. So I just wanted to ask how your morals have ebbed and flowed through your career, and how you think that's kind of changed and evolved. Big question.
Yeah. It's a funny one. Funny enough, I don't think the moral compass has always been pointing in the same direction. I think, and even a theme, I think in some of the things I feel like I've been saying today and that Joe has been saying is I think I've learned to be a little bit more nuanced as to how that works. Like you're saying, Katie, I think I started out with like big ideas, and it may be like an oversimplistic view on how easy it could be to change something and to do things differently. Whereas now I realize that it's a broken but moving train that I don't have the benefit of stopping to fix. So I have to we all have to figure out how to fix it as it's moving. Um, so I've learned to be a little bit more kind of like nuanced and careful in how I judge things, not to judge things too quickly, not to make assumptions, because I've had clients that looked great on the surface but weren't so great to work with, and also on the contrary, clients that didn't look great to work with but that were amazing actually as partners. So um, I started to look a little bit deeper into how I could do things, and ultimately, I think I had maybe bigger kind of like societal political aspirations. And I think there's something about understanding that even as a creative, if you're truly passionate about what you're doing and you're putting out work that reflects your convictions and what you believe in, that's a pretty big gift to give. So there's a humility in accepting, like, can I just make at whatever scale is available to me, things just a little bit better around me. And it can be tiny little things, but if we're doing that with honesty, I think we're adding a lot of value, and we're contributing to making things much better without having to worry about like trying to solve everything all at once by ourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I do feel though that I have changed significantly. And those big changes, I don't know, some astrologer is going to kill me, but I think it's like the return of the Saturn or whatever, the return of the moon. But every 7 years, you question your existence and you're like, what am I doing? And that has definitely happened to me. And I have been like so close to being like, I'm out. I'm going to go fully into academia, like academic, or just, completely, I don't know, just completely get out of this industry. And every time I am at that edge, there is some sort of optimism that comes either from working with younger designers, or working with education, or working with an excellent brief that gives me faith back, restored faith into what it is that we do. But I have changed. I didn't really care much about politics when I was in Colombia. It was a very kind of corrupt time back in the 90s. And then I had like the political education in France. So that kind of cemented my values and how I think. And then the whole awakening with like the moving to Australia and the First Nations relationship, the First Nations people and the gay marriage, and all of these things that were simply happening around us that you could not ignore. And they had repercussions on the type of work that we were doing and who I was as a person. And then motherhood also significantly changed me on what I want to focus my time and my energy on. So I feel like these big changes as a human have definitely changed what I do. And I guess that's with everyone, right?
Yeah.
That's probably why older designers, there's an incredible wisdom in what they've gone through and how much the industry has changed, that unfortunately our industry is quite ageist, but we would be better off listening and hearing all that knowledge accumulated from others.
They are such lovely answers, and I love to round off an episode being really optimistic. But I do now have a pointed question for you both that perhaps seems a little bit trivial
Love
in
it.
comparison to the nature of that conversation. But bring it all the way back to why we're here, good, bad, and ugly clients. I'd love you both to try and pinpoint one non-negotiable, one red flag that you absolutely wouldn't work with a client based on the back of that. So this might even just be advice for someone who's starting out on their own. So what's one thing that if you saw that in a client or in a brief that you would say, nope, I'm walking away from this? Apart from budget.
That is hard. That is a hard question.
It's a bit of a cop out, but I think if I see that a business is going to cause more harm than good, without much of a payoff, then it's something to walk away from. So there were the easy ones to answer in the beginning, like gambling. It wasn't on the quick fire, but you mentioned like drones for military use, like definitely not things that cause more destruction and harm than good, then that's one thing. Um, but running a smaller branding studio, we haven't encountered those, so it's a bit hypothetical. Everything else, it's a bit more, it's not as black and white. But I think if you honestly, I think a lot of it down to gut feeling and your convictions and your belief. I think if you know deep down that you don't feel comfortable, you have that feeling like, like this doesn't feel great, or I'm not excited about this, then it's probably, if you can, it's probably better to listen to that gut feel and to walk away.
Yeah, I think aside from everything that we've said that would be non-negotiable, I would say the way the person on their side treats our team, that's no. Like,
Yeah.
and that sometimes you are able to detect that very early on. So hopefully that's not something that you discover unless someone goes and they replace it with someone else, and you never know. But I feel that for me is, I get very protective of my team, and it just wouldn't get the best out of me. Angry Joe would come out. We don't want to see her.
What about your biggest green flag? What's one thing that you might see in a client that would be a green flag? And they might be a client that's come from one of these slightly more contentious agencies, but what's a little green flag that you would say, actually, I do think we want to work with these people?
I'd probably say for me it's an easy one, but it's how close you are with it to impact. It is the like the go-to. So for instance, any company these days has, whether a foundation or a philanthropy or something, like they make millions and millions here. They might not be the best guys here, but look at what we're doing over here in research and science, all of these. And you could say we're helping them here because then they are helping, like the bottom down economy, they're helping what's happening there. You could say that, but I'd much rather work with that arm, with that side. So the closer to impact we are, the greener the flag, the bigger and the greener the flag is. And if it's a tiny green flag of those, I think then you have to just ask yourself if that's just an excuse,
Yeah,
but that's just personal.
completely. And I think I think that 100%, I think proximity to impact, and I think the only thing that I would add then is just that the openness from the client's point of view to actually make that impact. Because we've been in the situation of being so close, and like we could do it if we really wanted to, and then maybe the will wasn't there or the trust wasn't there. So we always try to kind of like look for that openness and that will to actually make the impact is the honestly, if the client has that, then we know that we can figure out most of the rest in the process.
Amazing. I am less convinced than ever whether we've answered any questions today, really. But I think that we have talked about a lot, and hopefully we've touched on some of the things that our listeners wanted to hear when they saw the title, when they're thinking about the clients that they work for. And perhaps it all helps us turn a little bit of a critical eye to the projects that we're working on this week. And if that's all that happens, then that's good enough for us. I can't thank you both enough for being on the first episode back in season 2. Thank you so much for joining us.